Well, it will be of no surprise to most of the people in here that the section that I'm looking to amend is around collection and disclosure of personal information, which is a topic near and dear to my heart. I was a little surprised to find that in this bill, but when I did, I don't like the way it's in there, because we collect too much information, and then we keep it too long, and we use it for purposes beyond which we've collected it, and then we're not careful about how we get rid of it. And we repeat that the government, through legislation and policies and regulations, repeats that over and over and over again. And it's not just, the examples that I gave recently in the House around, safekeeping of records with personal information was private business, which was the hospitality group that managed to lose their USB, what are the things called you poke in the side of the computer? Something drive, USB drive. Thumb drive, zip drive, okay, here we go, high tech. Thumb drives, and on it was all the personal information of every employee they'd ever had, and it wasn't encrypted. And that's the same group that also scanned and kept all of the driver's licenses with the permission and encouragement and assistance of this government, for which I will never forgive them. But there, so that's a private company. We've got examples of doctors' offices where the doctor retires, they don't know what to do with his files. It ends up going to his nurse. The nurse retires, it's in a box in her garage. She dies and somebody's trying to throw out a bunch of medical files that were in a garage. So, there's lots of different ways this can happen. So one, don't collect so much information. Collect only what you need to use. And the one piece of legislation where the government actually managed to do that right was in the Health Information Act. And it very specifically says collect only what you need, and that must be the least amount that you could possibly collect. So that's the collection part of the information. And just so that you're all with me here, this is amending Section 16. So under that Division 3, general powers, duties, and functions of the regulator. And then we've got the powers of the regulator, factors to consider on applications, and then the third one, which is actually Section 16, disclosure of information to the minister. Right. So we've got the regulator shall, on the written request of the minister, provide to the minister within the time specified in the request any report, record, or other information, here it comes, including personal information that is specified in the request. And where we're changing it is to say any report, record, or other information, including personal information, if the person whose personal information that is specified in the request consents in writing to its disclosure. So remember, there's three parts to this, right? There's the initial collection of the personal information, there is the use of the personal information, and there is the disclosure of the personal information. And what we're talking about here is the disclosure of it, essentially, because it's already been collected. The minister's now said, I want to see this information. Now, interestingly, it doesn't say why the minister wants it, and he, she is not required to tell anybody why they're collecting that information, which, I just don't want my personal information collected by the minister when he can't tell me why he wants it. And I'm going to ask my colleagues from the Wild Rose to talk about what kind of personal information is collected that would be in these files that could then be requested by the minister, because they're much more up on that than I am. So we've got a situation where the minister can say, I want this information. The regulator hands it over. The person doesn't know it's been requested by the minister, doesn't know it's been handed over by the minister, and has no ability, if it's incorrect, or unverified, has no ability to know that it's now being disclosed to somebody else, the minister specifically, no opportunity to correct it. They don't even know it's happened. And the second piece I'm trying to change here is that where the minister does request it, that request has to be made public. And that's part of it, so that it would come out that the minister has asked for a report, a record, or other information, including personal information. So two things are happening here. One, the individual whose personal information is being disclosed to the minister would have an opportunity to sign a consent. And if you guys accept this and you make this a blanket, you make it a blanket consent form, I will haunt you, because that's the other thing that the government.
That's a threat. That's a threat.
For a long time. Because that's what happened. You know, when we brought in personal information, we're supposed to be protecting everybody's personal information. And what happens? Well, every doctor's office, dentist, massage therapist, hospital check-in, just about anywhere that you went where they could possibly have your name, they now say, oh, but before we can give you service, you need to sign this. And people go, oh, okay, well, whatever, and they sign it. It's a blanket consent form, which then gave them permission to pretty much do whatever they wanted with the information without ever coming back to you again. So we don't call that informed consent in my side of looking at this stuff. So we're asking for two things here. One is that the individual gets an opportunity to decline, and if they're going to give permission, they're going to give it in writing. So we've got a record of it all. And two, if the minister makes that request, it's going to be public, so that we all know that the minister requested that information. And this is important because so much information is being collected on individuals, and we don't know why, and we don't know, again, how long they're going to keep it. And, you know, just because it's so darn handy, especially when it's in those electronic databases where you can just, there's a visual here, you know, hit the button with your finger, and that information goes out and can be data matched with other banks of information. And now all of a sudden, even if you had managed to use just bits of information, you can literally reconstruct the individual by data matching. I think this is important. I know people laugh at me about this, but there's too much information about us out there in the world. And where we might say, okay, well, hopefully the government has our best interests at heart when they're collecting our information, there are so many points of interconnection between the public sector, the government now, and the private sector who really don't have our best interests at heart and shouldn't. They're there to make money. They're there to make money for their shareholders. That's what makes that economy go round. They have no obligation to be nice to us, nor should they. But as a result, in those points of interconnectedness, now where does that happen? Oh, let's talk P3 for schools. Let's talk, I mean, everything is contracted out with this government. Cleaning services in the hospitals. You know, whoever services the fleet of cars for the government. Who's providing childcare beds. All of that stuff is now contracted out. And every time that happens, some information goes out into the private sector. And it's, you know, I'm not saying they're bad people. They're not. They should be making money for their shareholders. Good on them. But part of that is not a commitment to do the right thing with our information, especially, and there are certain requirements. PIPA would cover them, for example, but it's not the same commitment as what we expect from government. So I want to put the onus here in the legislation that they have to get the person's permission, which means they would know, which I think is fair. And I can't see a reason in here, but I look at the minister to see if he's going to stand up and give me a compelling argument, like an earth-shatteringly accurate, pithy, to-the-point argument about why you would need to be collecting someone's personal information and not letting them know. And I can't see that you're going to be able to come up with that one. And secondly, you know, why are you collecting that information? For what purpose are you going to use it? And how do you make sure that anyone else that gets that information doesn't misuse that? Now, why is that possibly the minister's concern? Well, because that's the way we do privacy of information. We say whoever has it is responsible for doing the right thing with it. And in this case, if the government gives it off to a contractor, they are responsible for making sure that the contractor does the right thing with that information. And as I said, the contractor, it's not their business to do that. So they have oversight from the government, who's ultimately responsible for the protection of our personal information. And none of that protection is built into this Act. So I don't need to belabor the point, but I am going to ask some of my colleagues that have a deeper understanding of how the Act works to just talk about under what circumstances would somebody's personal information be held by the regulator and possibly asked for by the minister. Because it's important to know under what context this kind of thing is going to happen, and what kind of personal information. There's a difference between the tombstone information of, name, address. Well, actually, as soon as you start putting together any two of a photograph, any biometrics like a fingerprint or an iris print, of signature, full name, address, birth date is a big one. With the biometrics could also be blood types or DNA. You've got a lot of information on people, and why would they be collecting that? So I'm going to let my colleagues talk about for what purposes they would be collecting personal information. And you'll start to get a picture of why it's important to make sure that the individual, you'd have to go back to the individual and get consent for them to pass that information on to the minister. And that the minister would have to make public the fact that they've requested that information. And just so that this isn't unusual, did you know that the Minister of Health can request any of your personal health records? Ooh. Well, the Minister of Human Services says, why would he want to? I don't know. But he can, and you empowered him or her to do that in the Act. And they are able to. And they wouldn't have to tell us about it at all. And this is the kind of thing I'm trying to prevent here. So if the minister wants to collect that personal information, you've got to come and get my permission. And two, you're going to have to publish the fact that you asked for my personal information. So that's the amendment. It is on the books now as A9, and I hope this is going to generate a rousing discussion and the blessing and support of the Minister of Energy, along with his colleagues in the government side and my colleagues in the opposition. Thank you,
Honourable Member. I'll offer the Minister a chance to respond, and then I'll recognize the member for...
Ooh, pithy and brilliant. Let's go.
Well, I can't promise it will be either pithy or what? Brilliant. Yes. Yes. There you go. But Mr. Chair, really, we need to be practical here in terms of how we look at this. And everybody needs to recognize the fact that we're not overriding FOIP here. Personal information is still protected by FOIP. All of the individuals involved within the government, as well as the regulator, are still under the constraints of FOIP. And the ensuring that personal information is protected. There might be times, the honourable member asked for examples of what might include personal information. One example is, the expense accounts of the CEO or the board members or the commissioners. Those are things that you would need to have this in place in order to enable the receipt of those kinds of that kind of information. So there's the goal here is to ensure that there is good open communication between the regulator and the Department of Energy, so that policy issues, as they're being considered, can be looked at in the full light of the knowledge of both the regulator and the Energy Department to look at policy issues. Those are just a couple of examples. It's probably not I suspect it's not a wholesome enough answer to satisfy the honourable member, but that she did ask for examples, and those are the examples I can give.
Thank you. You need to respond, honourable member?
Yes, I do.
Then I'll get to the member for Grimby.
Well, I'm afraid, Minister, it wasn't brilliant, but it was clever. Using examples of things that the opposition have recently requested or like to look at for appointed people that are on boards and commissions. But the fact of the matter is you don't need personal information to get that because there's a financial hook to it. Because you don't need, for example, to actually be naming the person. You can ask for, as you did, the expense reports for the CEO of X position of X board. So you don't have to name them. So you can get the information that you described without getting additional personal information from them, but by going through a financial request. So I don't accept that that is a reason for you to decline your support for the amendment. I know there's a practicality to this. I know sometimes it would be hard to chase people down and get their consent. But you haven't been able to tell me how many people you'd usually be requesting information from. If you can stand up and tell me it's 1.5 million people every year, okay, we're talking a little bit different approach to this. But that still doesn't, in my opinion, excuse the government from having to get permission from someone to take and use their personal information. And I cut off my honourable friend here, so I will take my seat again, and, you know, maybe I can engage the minister again.